Hey guys, it's Elizabeth. I am here to share a lesson with you that I've done with my students. And this is going to help us as we work through the memory door of poetry. So this is just a great strategy to help students kind of mine their memories and think about the stories they have to tell from their lives. So I use a mentor text called Marshfield Dreams. It's written by Ralph Fletcher. If you're not familiar with the book, it's his memoir. So every chapter is just a different memory, different story from his life. And then this map is actually in the end papers of the book. I would show you, however, it is in a box at school. So I just had to make do with what I could find online. So here is the map. So what I would ask my students to do first when I'm teaching this lesson is simply to talk about what they notice about this map. So go ahead and take some time to think about that yourself. Just what do you notice? Feel free to pause it if you want to get a closer look first. And so some of the things my students would say that they notice, they want to know like what street he lives on. So we talk about how he lives on Acorn Street. They ask if this is a street too, and I say that's his driveway, so it's dirt driveway. And then they are interested in the house, so they see his house, but they also see another house, so they want to know why there's two houses, and I explain how that's Andy Hunt's house. And then I talk about how there's other friends. It talks about where his other friends live in relation to him. And then they also, of course, notice like the vegetable garden and the chicken coop and all the woods and the trees, and so they start to ask like a little bit about where he lives. Like, oh, does he live on a farm, or where is this place? And so we'd have a little discussion about that, how, yeah, this is definitely not like a city or a suburban area. It looks more like a rural area. And then they start to just notice some of the details, and then they start to have questions like, why does it say old buried trash right here? And why does it say rocks where we smash bulbs? Like, why did he have to include such small details in his map? So that's just a little bit of like what my students usually notice. And then the next thing that we do is I invite my students to make their own neighborhood map. Of course, I model it for them first, but I will go ahead and do that. Let me straighten this up. All right, so I'm going to choose to do my neighborhood where I grew up. So I grew up on a street called Leslie Drive. Go ahead and draw my street first. This is Leslie Drive. And it connected with a road called Morningside. Okay, so this is Morningside. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in some of the houses. So this is my house. And then right next to us, my neighbors, Marge and Dawn. This is Marge and Dawn's house. My neighbor on the other side was Elsie. This is Elsie's house. And then this, of course, like I said, my house. We had a swing set in our backyard. We also had a big apple tree, like right here. I remember. Apple tree. Oh, sorry. There you go. And then Marge and Dawn's house, they had a pool, so we're going to add that pool in. On the other side of the street, this is where my friend Chris and Eric lived. And then a little bit ways down from them was my best friend's house. This is my best friend, Carissa's house. I do apologize for the screaming in the background. It's always something going on in my house, right? Okay, so this is Carissa's house. Another cool feature of where I lived, we had a little path. If you walked just all the way along the street and down this way, there was a little nature trail that led to some soccer fields. So we'll draw a little arrow that says 2 soccer fields. That was kind of a cool thing. Okay. All right, so I think you get the idea. So go ahead and pause the video and take some time to work on your own neighborhood map. You can choose any neighborhood you want. So it could be your neighborhood now, or it could be your childhood neighborhood, or I was in a PD once and a man chose to do his college neighborhood, which led for some very interesting stories. So go ahead and pause the video and work on your sketch. All right, so for my kindergarten students, that would be one day. I would just spend one day on them making their maps, and then we would come back to it the following day, and I would share the story with them. So I share this story with them that is from the book, Marshville Dreams. So I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. This chapter is called Jimmy. When Jimmy and I were in our bunk beds, we talked about everything. Most of the time, I knew what he was thinking, and he knew my thoughts too. One time, Jimmy led a bunch of kids through a part of Ailes Woods we'd never explored before. It was hot and the rest of us wore shorts, but Jimmy always wore heavy jeans because he liked to climb through thickets of briars and prickers. His face was sweaty and streaked with dirt. We just entered a sunny meadow, running full speed when Jimmy suddenly slammed on the brakes. He pointed out a wooden shack caved in on one side. "Come on," he yelled. Jimmy climbed in. I heard a muffled cry, and then he climbed out again. Everyone gasped. He was triumphantly holding 2 fistfuls of snakes. There must have been 6 of them in each hand, garter snakes twisting in the sunlight, furious that their sleeping pace had been disturbed. Another time, after a bad windstorm, Jimmy and I went hiking through a swampy part of the woods. The storm had knocked over a tree, and a shallow pool had formed in the crater left by the mass of uplifted roots. We went for a closer look, and as I moved to the water's edge, something lurched into the water. That's like the equivalent of the fire alarm going off in your school. So the alarm in my house just went off. Sorry about that. So let me go back to where I was. So I think I was like right here. Did you see that? Jimmy asked. Yeah, I nodded. Looked like some kind of newt or salamander. That was no ordinary salamander, Jimmy informed me. Didn't you see the red on its gills? At home, Jimmy searched through the World Book Encyclopedia to find the animal he'd seen. For a long time, he sat on the living room floor, paging through volumes A, amphibians, L, lizards, and R, reptiles. Found it, he said, showing me the page. A mud puppy, that's it. We saw a mud puppy. Mud puppy. I fell in love with the odd name and funny pictures it made in my head. The name clicked. Pretty soon, all the neighborhood kids were calling that uprooted tree Mud Puppy Place, although we never did see any mud puppies after that day in the woods. And so from this point, I just asked my students to tell me what they noticed about that story in relation to the map. So go ahead and take some time. I'm going to put the map back up there, so if you want to look again, what did you notice about that story and this map? So what my students start to notice, of course, they notice that it says Mud Puppy Place. And so that was the spot that they talked about in the story. They also see Ailes Woods, which is talked about in the story. They see the swamp and the uprooted tree. And so they kind of start to understand, oh, he's using his map to help him tell stories. Okay? So that would just kind of be the second day that I would try with my students. And what I would ask them to do on that day is go back to their maps and just start talking with a partner about stories they can find on their map. So, of course, again, I would model this for them. Okay? So, of course, I have lots of stories. And I'm just going to kind of add some things to my map that I want to remember. Okay? So I could talk about the time that this tree got sick and we had to cut it down. So that was a sad story because I really loved our apple tree. So that was a very sad day. I could talk about going to Elsie's house and how she had a photography studio in her basement. And so she would often like have us over and take pictures for my mom, get us all dressed up. Another memory I have of her, she always let us come over, but then like in the afternoon, she'd always be like kicking us out. So she'd always say, "Get out, it's time for me to watch my stories." And as a child, I thought like she was putting on home movies, and I eventually realized, oh, she's watching her soaps. So I loved that about her, my stories. So I have lots of memories from the soccer field. I actually played soccer down here and would practice, so some memories there. For Carissa's house, lots of memories playing with her and hanging out with her. Something big that's sticking out is she had a gymnastics mat in her basement, so gymnastics, and her dad would always help us tumble, and I was terrible, so he would have to like literally flip my entire body around to do a back handspring, so that was always fun. Chris and Eric's house, I have a big memory with this one. They had this really giant dog. I don't remember his name. It was a big black dog. I think it was like Bruno or Brutus or something like along those lines. It was giant dog. Sorry about my crazy sketch. But I just love dogs, and we didn't have any pets growing up, so I would always want to go pet other people's dogs. And so one day I went to their house and I asked if I could take their dog for a walk, and they said yes. So I started walking down the road, and next thing you know, this dog just decided to take off, and I was still holding onto the leash. So the dog literally dragged me all the way down our road. Yeah, definitely an injury story here. Eventually I let go of the leash, but it took me a minute to realize I needed to do that. Another memory I have, kind of a sadder memory. We had a birthday party for my little brother when he was, I don't remember, I think he was like turning 1 maybe. He was really little. And my grandma was there, and she actually collapsed at the party. And then the ambulance came and had to take her away. And then, so the memory that I have of Margin Don's pool is actually we were swimming in that pool because they had sent the kids to them while they went in the ambulance. And then I just remember my mom coming back and saying that my grandma had passed away. So this was definitely like a sad memory that I have here. All right, so as you can see, I'm just going through my map, thinking about stories and memories that I have and kind of jotting down things so I can remember them. So go ahead and pause the video and give that a try. And then the final thing, this is kind of the next thing I would do, is I would just teach them to use their map as a strategy, just like Ralph Fletcher did. I don't know if he had his map first or his story first, but for them, I just say, hey, he had on his map Mud Puppy Place. And so that became a story that he could write. So we can do the same thing. So I have the story about my grandma while I was swimming in Margin Don's pool. So I could write a story about that. But I was thinking stories can be poems, right? So often a poem is a narrative. So we could also write poetry about these things. I could absolutely write a poem about this injury story of the dog dragging me down the road. I could write a poem about my grandma. I could write a poem about my apple tree getting sick, and so forth. And I just ask them to use this as a strategy during writing workshops. So anytime that they want to use it, it's there as a resource for them. So hope you enjoyed, and you guys have a good day. Thanks.